So, data centers. You're the tree huggers in the data center world. In the nerd space, you have the server huggers. I'll tell a bit about that. But a lot of stuff has resonated, and I'll come back to what Danny said about serverless. There's a certain attraction to that. It has a lot to do with data, but it also has a lot to do with architecture. It has a lot to do with which type of applications you run to make the most of serverless. So, data centers. Let's start with a rough quote from Steve Jobs. To know where your future leads to, you need to be able to connect the dots in the past. That's what I'm going to do with you guys. Look a bit at the past, where we were, and what we do. I love to see a couple of, let me say, silverbacks here in the audience.
Easy.
Who knows what that is? What's that? Guys, come on. Who knows that? That's an IBM System 380 from the 80s. That one's from 85. At that time, I was in school, and I thought I wanted to be a farmer. Stupid me, look where I am right now. Sorry?
There's hard drive.
No, these are not hard drives. God, no. These things are tapes.
Yes. No, tapes.
They're tapes. They're bloody tapes. You know, look at that. This is what a data center looked like. It was not a data center. It was a room somewhere in your company. It was literally furniture. If you look at the first supercomputers at that time, Cray, YMP. Anybody knows the Cray YMP? Very, very popular picture. The one, it was literally furniture. You could sit on it. It had cushions on it. Yeah. This is how it goes. People who knew how these things work, AS400 systems, they're still in use. People who knew how these things, these were, suit and tie people. They were scientists. They were highly regarded. They were, worshipped by people who didn't know how to do that. The movie with what was her name? Whoopi Goldberg, Jumpin' Jack Flash. Remember that? There were huge rooms already sitting. When I was leaving school at about end of the 80s, beginning 90s, I got suggestion to be a data typist. Hello? Who would be a data typist these days? You don't do that anymore. This is how it looks like. Then something funny happened. In the 1980s, so in the 1980s, 1990s, the Intel x86 platform and architecture came out. And this is where server hardware, server space, server usage exploded, like the Cambrian time in Earth. This is actually a picture of the CERN data center. CERN, you know that? The high energy physicists, those people on the spectrum, as we used to say in academia. This is a live picture out of the data center. This is how data centers do look like, 18-inch rack, stuff like that. It's that times when two funny characteristics of data center people emerged. And one of them was, if you Google it, the bastard operator of hell was the person who was the gatekeeper of the data center, of everything, of the printers, of server time. You had to schedule server time. You get the reminiscence of that in Sheldon and the Big Bang Theory, what's his name again, who was the gatekeeper of the server time in the XC project, with which I actually worked back then in my former life. And the other one is, people that you don't see. And it's the Richmonds of data centers. These guys, you just throw food and drink at them, and they're happily living within the racks. They sleep and live, they breathe network cables. Okay? What then happened was an explosion. Literally, this is, if you look at Pinterest and search network fails, you get thousands of pictures like that. This is still how data centers these days look like. Luckily, with the scale up of data centers, they moved from, rooms in your house into, next building. What you got is hardcore networking, or more vulgarly, data center porn. You get literally pictures of people posting how beautiful the data center looks like, how clean it is. No jokes. But this is how it looks like. It's still how it goes. The interesting thing then now comes with, as Danny said, interestingly, Salesforce and LinkedIn had nice conversations with these guys, with developers and site reliability engineers. It's a common misconception that SaaS and IaaS and cloud computing requires virtualization. No, it doesn't. LinkedIn runs entirely without virtualization today. Salesforce did run entirely without virtualization for a big part of the life. You don't need it. You need a very intelligent application server and systems architecture to run it. What then happened was proliferation of scale. And this is a live picture, well, not live picture, it's a picture from Google Data Center, somewhere in the world. You see all of a sudden the massive scale, it's all x86 architecture. What happens is that actually Google, Facebook, and all these other companies, the hyper-converging companies, they start to commoditize and specialize on their own hardware architecture. There is an open server architecture out there. It's open source, developed by Google, Facebook, LinkedIn. They all know that. It's very specialized hardware suitable for hyper-converged data centers. With that, there was a notion of centralization of IT. The outsourcing started to become centralized, and the notion of gravity, of data center gravity came, and data centers can only scale physically to a certain size, because at some point you get problems with electricity, with power, with access, physical access for people, data center design, airflow, cooling, all these kind of things. All of a sudden data centers started, they couldn't scale anymore, and yet there was much more demand. And then that happened, all of a sudden your data center becomes intrinsically networked. This is a live picture, a screenshot of Amazon's availability and location centers all around the world. And the interesting thing is with Amazon services, you have built-in distribution of services. If you use their services, if you use their virtual machines deployed on the infrastructure, you can control well on which reliability level and on which duplicity level they're actually running around the world. You can configure, and that's what Google is doing as well, configure their workload to follow the sun around the world. That they stop services when that's dark, and that literally the activity follows around the world. And with that, your data center started to look like this. You had huge investments in real estate, in property, to run your data centers, and today's data centers look like that. It's what you do with this thing. Do you rent it out? Everybody, realizes, I don't need this. This is a huge capital lock-in in your company, huge amount of equity that's dead. What do you do with that? Yeah? And the next thing, and this is where serverless and everything else comes, for me, the ideal data center looks like this. I don't have any physical, any actual hardware estate at all anymore. My data center in the next few years is entirely software defined, it's entirely in the public cloud. Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they all have the certifications required for governance, for international governance. If you look at which certifications they provide, they're all PCI DSS for financial transactions certified. They're all certified against HIPAA, which is the US healthcare governance. They're all working towards being certified against European regulations, European cybersecurity regulations. They're all working together. I'm actually involved directly with the Commission and working in the working groups that work on cybersecurity certification for data center and cloud service providers in the EU as a response towards GDPR. And what's coming up is the European cybersecurity regulation. It's coming up next year. Currently, we're working on switching and porting between cloud service providers. That's what Danny said. Later on multi-cloud. When I first went with cloud, it was in 2006, 4, 5, when I played with Xen hypervisors, live migrating virtual machines between servers. My first thought was data centers have redundancy provisions for connectivity. Why don't companies not push for redundancy in their cloud provisions, in the cloud infrastructure? And this is where it's going. But if you go to the public cloud, make sure you retain your own. You retain the people in the know, because that becomes your key asset of not getting stripped of your knowledge and making the most of the public cloud. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much.